Well, good morning. Man, I was like upstairs getting ready to come down like that, and I was like, holy cow, there's a lot of people in here for this service. So it's great to see all of you. You guys should be so glad that you showed up today. I'm really excited to be here with you today. And right now we are in a series on leadership. And how many of you in this room made it out on Friday night for our leadership advance that we put on? Seriously, it was so incredible. It was so incredible. We had a great time hearing from a couple of really incredible leaders. If you weren't able to make it, you totally missed out. I'm really sorry because it was really good, but we definitely have plans to want to do that again in the future. So hopefully if you missed this one, you can make it out too when we do it again. But like I said, we are talking about leadership. And I think for a lot of people, when we hear that a message on leadership is going to be given or that we're having a leadership series, a lot of times people will have one of two reactions. Either maybe you are already in a position of leadership, you would consider yourself a leader, and so you get really excited about that. And you're like, awesome, they're talking about leadership. I can get some tools to help me be a better leader. Or maybe you're someone that you hear that and you're like, well, it doesn't really apply to me because I'm just not really a leader. Well, throughout this series, we have actually been trying to debunk that myth that leadership is only for the select few, okay? Leadership is not just for this elite group of people who have really dynamic personalities or who like to be on a stage. We are talking in this series that leadership really and truly is for everyone. We've been discussing that whether it's in your home, in your school, in your workplace, or wherever it is that we believe that everybody can choose to lead. Everyone can take and step up into that position of leadership. It's not just for the dynamic type A personalities. I am not a type A personality, but I can still be a leader. It's not just for people that are really outgoing. I'm not always that outgoing. I'm an introvert. So introverts in here, we can still be leaders. I've got great news for you. And it's not just for people that have a title, because in fact, leadership isn't about position, it's about influence. That's what leadership is about. It's about influence. Anytime that you have influence in somebody else's life, you have the potential to be a leader. That's just how it is. Leadership isn't a behavior, it is a behavior, not a title. Okay, leadership, it's a way of living, it's a way of life. We all have it in us to be a leader, and we don't have to wait for a title to step up and be a leader. So given the fact that leadership is not just reserved for a select few, the question that we need to ask ourselves isn't, can I be a leader? Because we've determined that we all, in fact, can. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of leader will I be? What kind of leader will I be? Because we get to choose the kind of leader that we are. And there are tons of leaders around us. There are tons of leaders. There's leaders of organizations, of businesses, of teams, of churches. There are a lot of leaders, but not all who lead well. Not everyone who leads well. And I'm sure that in this room, that many of us have stories of maybe 1 or 2 or 10 times in our life when we have been underneath someone's leadership who wasn't leading well. Who all has been underneath leadership that you would say, you know what, that just wasn't good leadership? I think a lot of us have experienced that. I know that I have. There was one time in my life, back when I was in ministry school, and we a lot of times would travel to other churches and partner with them. And there was an instance where there was a team of about 15 of us, and we had traveled to a different state, and we were partnering with the church. And there were co-leaders of the trip. There was this guy and this girl, and they were co-leading. And throughout the entire trip, this female co-leader, she continually undermined every decision that the guy leader made. She whined and complained in meetings in front of the whole team when things didn't go the way she wanted them to. In fact, in one meeting, because when we travel and do ministry, we used to all wear matching t-shirts because we thought we were super cool. And apparently we still do that today, because if you look around, a bunch of us are wearing matching t-shirts today. But and we were having this meeting, and the guy was like, hey, for tonight's service, we're all gonna wear this t-shirt. And she proceeded to yell and throw this fit that wasn't the shirt she wanted to wear, and she stormed out. And the rest of us were just like, is this happening right now? Are you kidding me? So was she technically a leader of the trip? Yes. Did she lead well? No way. No way. And I will always remember that experience. But on the flip side, I think a lot of us could talk about experiences and stories and times that we've had of when we've been underneath leadership that has been really good leadership. I can think back on my life to times of teachers and employers and coaches and pastors that I have been under that have just exemplified great leadership. And the things that made them great, it wasn't just because they had that title of leader, but the things that made them great were things like, I could tell they genuinely cared about me as a person. I could tell that they cared more about the success of the team than they did about their own individual success. They had integrity. They walked with humility. They championed and encouraged the other people on the team. See, those are all marks and qualities of a great leader. But today, I believe that there is one characteristic, there's one leadership principle, if you will, that I want to talk about today that I believe is hands down the most important character leadership trait that you can have that will be the mark of whether or not you become a great leader and whether or not you lead well. And in fact, this leadership principle is so important that it actually is the reason that we're all here today. This leadership principle is the reason why a movement that started thousands of years ago in the first century with a radical teacher and a ragtag group of followers, it's the reason why that movement is still influential in the lives of people today. It's a principle that's at the core of what it really means to be like Jesus. And I believe that if we can grab a hold of this principle, if we can adopt this leadership quality into our life, it will completely revolutionize our community. I really believe that because it did back in the first century, starting with Jesus. Completely changed everything. See, when Jesus came on the scene, he turned everything on its head, because when Jesus came, he came to do something new. He came to do something new. Every miracle that Jesus performed, every conversation that we see recorded in scripture that he had with someone, every teaching that Jesus gave, all of it, every bit of it pointed to this new way of living. A way that nobody even fully grasped or understood. It's why the Roman Empire and the religious leaders of that day hated him, because he was stirring things up and he was challenging the status quo and he was doing something new, and it terrified everyone in a position of power and authority, because one of the new things that Jesus came to bring was a new way of looking at authority and a new way to lead. And his disciples, the 12, that were the ones that actually started the early church, because they grabbed a hold of this new way of looking at authority and this new way of leadership, and they allowed it to change the way they lived and to change the way they interacted with other people. We are sitting here today because of that, invested into this thing that we call Christianity. And if you're a Christ follower in the room today, if you call yourself a Christian, is it not our goal to become more like Jesus? It's that simple. We want to become more like Jesus, and that includes in every area of our life, and including in the way that we lead. We want to learn how to lead the way that Jesus led. And here's the thing, if you're not a Christian in this room, and if you would not call yourself a follower of Jesus, I still believe that this principle that we're going to talk about today, if you take this with you into your leadership and you lead this way, you will be a great leader. This will help you to become a great leader. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back a couple of thousand years to the time of Jesus, to a week that was known as the Passover. And the Passover was a celebration. The Jews celebrated it because it commemorated when they were brought out of slavery from Egypt. And so we've got Jerusalem, we've got all these surrounding communities, and dozens and hundreds of people are all coming in to celebrate the Passover. And Jesus and his disciples are among those people coming into the city to celebrate. So as they're heading in, Jesus pulls his disciples aside and he's thinking, Jesus knows what this week entails for him. He knows that he's about to go to the cross. And so he's thinking, man, I got to take every chance possible to just really give every important thing that I want these guys to know. I've got to take every chance I can. So he pulls them aside, and we're going to pick it up in the book of Mark, chapter 10, verse 33. And he says to him, listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man, he's talking about himself, the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. And 3 days later, he will rise. So here's Jesus telling his disciples all of these terrible, horrible things that he is about to endure. These terrible things that are about to happen to him. And immediately after Jesus says this, a couple of his disciples decide to ask him something that's been on their mind. So we see in verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And I'm like, seriously? Jesus just told you that he's gonna be beaten and spit on and mocked and killed, and you think this is the appropriate time to make it all about you. Have you ever kind of felt like that before? Or maybe you're going through something really hard in your life and you go to talk to somebody about it and you're pouring out your heart and they're like, oh man, I'm so sorry, but oh my gosh, you would not believe what's going on in my life. And they totally turn the whole thing around to be all about them. I can imagine that had to have been how Jesus felt in that moment. They're like, Jesus, man, flogging, that sounds super bad. And the whole spitting and mocking and the whole tying thing, it sounds really terrible, but we want you to do something for us. And not just something, but whatever we ask. I mean, talk about being socially inept. They just were not getting it in that moment. And when Jesus responds, sometimes when I read scripture, you know how when you're reading something, clearly you're not hearing them speak, so you can kind of put whatever voice tone to it that you want, and it gives it a totally different feel. So either Jesus is responding with incredible patience or really sarcastic, depending on how you read it. And I personally like to give him a sarcastic tone here because I think that's how I would have responded. But, it was probably with patience because Jesus is clearly way more like Jesus than I am. So it was probably really patient. So in verse 36, Jesus says to him, what do you want me to do for you? And I would have been like, oh, really? Well, what exactly is it that you want me to do for you? While I'm, being flogged and spit on and killed and all that. But he says, what do you want me to do for you? And they respond in verse 37, they replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. So they're like, Jesus, when your time comes to take your throne and when you finally overthrow the Roman Empire and really stick it to the man and you're ruling and leading, we want to rule with you. Will you let us be your number 2 and your number 3? Because see, that's what everyone expected from the Messiah. They expected him to actually set up a kingdom as they knew it and to overthrow Rome and to finally just really stick it to the man. And finally, they were not going to be under the thumb of the Roman Empire anymore. And what they missed, what they didn't get, that the kingdom that Jesus was establishing was a kingdom unlike anything they had ever known. But so to them, they're expecting him to establish this kingdom that they know it. And so they're like, Jesus, again, we're so sorry about all those terrible things, but we want to be your number 2 and number 3. We want to rule with you. And so they're talking to Jesus about this. And notice I said in the beginning, in the scriptures, it says the two said this to Jesus. So I imagine they kind of pulled Jesus aside so the other 10 don't hear what's happening, Well, as they're having this conversation, the other 10 hear what's going on and they're ticked. They're absolutely ticked. In fact, it says in the scriptures, they were indignant. And here's the thing. I don't think it's because they thought it was inappropriate for James and John to be asking to lead with Jesus. It was because they wanted in too. So I can hear them all arguing about who's going to have these positions of authority and who's going to get to lead with Jesus. And I just picture Jesus just kind of taking a couple steps back, letting them go at it for a minute, And I can picture him just thinking, seriously, I should reconsider my choice of disciples right now. He's like, maybe I should use my power to like time travel and leave those jokers in their fishing boats because this is ridiculous. So they're all arguing, but again, Jesus being way more like Jesus than I am, he takes this moment to lean further into it as a teaching moment, and he leans into it with such grace. And so, they're all fighting. He's like, okay, guys, calm down, come over here. And in verse 42, he tells them this. He says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles or the Romans lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. So he's saying, you know how authority works in our culture. You know how it works. You know that people that are in positions of power and authority, they use that power and authority for their own personal gain. They lord it over the people that are underneath them. You get that. You understand how that works because that's the way authority and power worked in the Roman Empire. And really, even in the religious structure of the day, it was that all of those at the top held all the power and they leveraged it for their own personal gain. Not that we would know anything about that in our culture, right? We don't know anything about, people in positions of power and authority, like using that to oppress people or anything like that. But for real, we see it all the time, right? We see, corporations that use their profits just to puff up the CEOs more and more, and the people underneath them get left behind. Maybe you've had a boss that has used their position of authority and leadership over you. Rather than to help you win, they've used it just to prop themselves up more. We've all experienced this. And this is how it was in their culture. So he's saying, guys, you know how this works, right? And they're like, yeah, we totally get it. Why do you think we want to be in authority with you? Because we know how authority works. And what Jesus says next is so powerful. The words he says next point to this new way of leading that Jesus is establishing in his kingdom. And in verse 43, Jesus looks at them and he says, not so with you. Not so with you. And I bet you could hear a pin drop at that moment. Jesus is saying to them, look, I know what you're familiar with. I know what you think authority and power and ruling and leadership is all about, but I am telling you that I have come to establish a new way. I am here to do something new. The authority that you have, the way that authority is to be managed for you is to look so different from anything that you're used to. You may see everybody else leverage their position of power and authority for their own personal gain, but not so with you. Not so with you. Because Jesus is saying power and influence is no longer for the powerful and the influential. No longer are you to use your power and your position to leverage it for your own gain, but you are to leverage it for the good of others. Not so with you. And then Jesus goes on because, he wants to really make sure that they get it. And so he goes on in verse 43 to say, instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be a what? Servant. And it's easy for us to see that and for it to kind of not have a whole lot of meaning for us. But back then, it had a whole lot of meaning for them. Because servants were hired to take on the most lowly positions in a household. And Jesus is saying to them, listen, if you want to be great, you have to become a servant. And then he takes it even a step further in verse 44, and he says, instead, whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. So first he says servant, which is a paid position. But then he says, whoever wants to be first must be a slave. Slave is like the back of the line. It's the lowliest of the low. He's saying in this new kingdom, this upside down kingdom that I am establishing, the way to greatness is through servanthood. That's how you're going to be great. He's telling them that power and authority and leadership is to be leveraged on behalf of others. And then if that didn't drive it home. He wants to just make sure that they get it. And in verse 45, he says, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So not only is he telling them that they need to take on the life of a servant to do great, but he's saying, that's why I even came. That's why I came. That Jesus, who is God, who is the King of Kings, came to serve. He came to serve, not to be served, not to use his power and authority to hold it over people, to lord it over them, but to leverage it for their benefit, to leverage it for their best interest. And he served to the point of giving his life. And then one of the things I love so much about Jesus is he wasn't just a lot of talk. He didn't just tell his disciples what to do. He didn't just tell them how to live, but he showed them with his actions. And so a few days later, we've got the disciples celebrating the Last Supper, this meal of Passover, and they're in this upper room. And Jesus knows what's about to happen in a few days. He knows he's going to the cross. He knows what he's about to endure for them. And so he knows this is his last time before his death to be with all of them. So he's got to make this time count. He's got to really show them what their leadership and their authority needs to look like. And so Jesus does something that catches everyone off guard. He removes his outer garment and he kneels down and he pours water into a basin and he picks up a sponge and he starts to wash their feet. And washing the feet, this was something really common then because, in Jesus' day, back then, they didn't have, their cool Converse or Nikes. They wore sandals everywhere and they walked everywhere and the roads were really dirty and dusty. So whenever you would have a guest in your home, one of the servants' jobs was to wash their feet. Or if you had been traveling and you would come home, your servant would wash your feet. And so Jesus kneels down and begins to take on the lowliest of the low positions, saying, when I tell you that your power and authority is to be leveraged for others, this is what I mean. It means you go as low as you can. You race to the back of that line and you serve and you wash others' feet. And I can just imagine how the disciples must have felt in that moment. None of them offered to do that for each other, let alone for Jesus. And that was customary. That's what you did after traveling. And none of them offered to do it. And not only that, but they had seen what those hands could do. They had seen those hands turn water into wine. They had seen those hands raise a man from the dead. They had seen those hands feed thousands with a little boy's lunch. They had seen those hands heal the blind and the deaf and the lepers. And now those very hands that held so much power were taking on the lowliest job in washing their feet. Can you imagine what that had to have felt like? So after Jesus had finished washing their feet, he said to them, John 13:12, he said, do you understand what I have done for you? Do you get it now? When I'm talking about using your power and your authority, leveraging it for others, do you get it now? Do you see what I mean when I say that power and authority will look different in my kingdom? And he goes on in verse 14 and 15 and says, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Because remember, Jesus didn't just tell people, he showed them. And in verse 16, he says, very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And Jesus is saying, look, you call me master, and I know that you would never say that you are greater than me. And I have washed your feet. So now you need to go and do that for others. In other words, you can never use who you are as an excuse to not serve others. You can never use who you are or your position or your title and think that that gives you an excuse or a reason or that you're justified in not serving others. In these accounts that we read about today about Jesus' life, we see him turning everything his disciples knew about authority on its head. And I really believe that after this, they finally got it. I really do. I think that washing of the feet moment sealed the deal for these guys. And the reason that I think this concept of serving others really stuck with them in that moment is because this whole concept of if you want to be great, you must serve is a concept that the early church exemplified. When we look at the accounts and acts of the early church, we see that the care of orphans and widows and the marginalized, it was just what they did. It was just ingrained in their DNA. It's just what they did. In fact, there was at one point where a couple, like the original 12, they were the only ones in the beginning that had seen the works of Jesus and knew how to teach others the way of Jesus. And they were spending all of their time serving and feeding the widows. And some other people came and said, listen, this group over here, they don't understand. They don't get it. They don't know how to live the way Jesus lived. And we need you to tell them. And they said, okay, we would rather be serving. But because they don't know how to follow the teachings of Jesus, we will divvy out these jobs to somebody else and we will go teach. But they wanted to stay here. They wanted to keep serving the widows because they knew that is where Jesus lives. That's where he is. That's where he leads from. And they wanted to be like him. It's so interesting that the same guys who were arguing about who was going to be number 2 and number 3 are now the ones that are running to the lowly places. And this continued on throughout the church. You will see that as the Jesus movement spread throughout the known world, it was the Christians who were known for running toward the lowly places when everybody else was running away. This whole concept of using your power and your leadership and your authority to serve is what made Christianity stand out. This whole idea of others first and leveraging ourselves for others, it's that concept that made the Jesus movement and Christianity spread like wildfire because people were like, what is this? Who does that? When there's a plague, who runs into the town instead of running out? Who does that? It's the followers of Jesus that do that. And it caused people to take notice. And I really, truly believe that if we as Christians, if we can learn to lead like that, if we can learn to serve one another, to race to the back of the line, I think the potential that it has to transform our homes, our workplaces, our schools, our neighborhoods, and this church is unfathomable. What we could see happen if we as Christians grab a hold of this. What would our world look like if instead of fighting for a seat at the head of the table, we picked up a basin and a sponge? And said, instead of trying to pave my way and become great, I'm going to just serve whoever I can, whenever I can. What would our world look like if we used our power and our authority and our leadership, not for our own personal gain, but as something that we use to help others win? What could our world look like? What if in everything we do, in every situation that we're in, every social gathering, every time we go to school or work or we're at home, what if we simplified it way down? And what if we just asked ourselves this question: how can I help? How can I help? Because we can all do that. Sometimes we think, oh, you're just talking about people that are like CEOs, that they're like, big time leaders that have a lot of people. No. Remember what we said in the beginning. Everybody, leadership is about influence, not position. So how can you use your influence to help others? It means that understanding that as a leader, you're there to serve your team, not be served by your team. What would your home look like if you committed to serving your family on a daily basis? What if you made it a habit every day of asking your kids or your spouse, how can I help you today? Teachers, as you're going back to school, what if every single day you asked at least one other teacher at your school, how can I help you today? What would your neighborhood look like if you dedicated yourself to serving the people in it? Maybe mowing someone's lawn or cooking them dinner or whatever it is. How can I help? How can I help you today? See, serving means learning to leverage your position, your time, your resources, your gifts, and your abilities for the sake of someone else. And I heard a really great leader say, how can I leverage me for you? How can I leverage me for you? Think about your life. Think about all the people in it. Think about the places this week that you're going to go. Think about all the ways that you can leverage who you are and what you have for the sake of others. Think about your privilege that we all have, even just by living where we live, the privilege that we have. How can we use that to serve other people and make their lives better? How can we leverage ourselves for someone else? How can we leverage me for you? Ask yourself that question. How can I leverage me for you? Or how can I help? And here's the thing, one really easy place that we can start. If you're listening to this and you're going, man, I really do want to make servant leadership a part of my life. I really do want to make a commitment and make it a priority to start serving others. I want to tell you a really, really great place that you can start is actually, like, look around you right here. Right here is a really great place where you can start doing that, start putting that into practice. Especially if you call Icon Church home. If you love what God is doing around here, I'm telling you, I have so many conversations with people and they're like, oh my gosh, I love what God's doing here. I love this church. I want it to be my home church. And the first two questions that I always ask them are, have you signed up to serve anywhere yet? And have you joined a small group? First two questions. And the reason for that is because when you are able to use your gifts and your abilities to serve other people, it helps you get connected in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise. See, here at Icon, we would love for you to join a serve team. And our host team here, they're going to go ahead and start passing out. They've got these serve team cards that have all the different areas that you can serve here at Icon. They're going to go ahead and pass those out, and you can just take a look at that. We would love to have you join a serve team. And if you look around the room today, you'll see, we talked about earlier, all of us wearing our matching shirts today. Can you just stand up if you're wearing an Icon 18 shirt real quick? These are all people that have already made the commitment to serve here at Icon and that serve on a regular basis. Can we give them a huge round of applause? These are the ones that have already committed. Say, hey, I want to join Team Icon. And so today, right after service, we have a serve rally happening out in the lobby where there'll be tables set up with all the team leads from the serve teams that you can chat with and ask questions. And if you do sign up today to serve, to join a team, we have a shirt to give you too, because every team has a jersey. And we want you to be a part of Team Icon, because teams work together, right? Because teams serve one another. Teams are more interested in the success of the whole than they are in just themselves. And we would absolutely love for you to be a part. There's something so beautiful that happens when we can use our gifts and our abilities to help serve others. And here's the thing, we're not just trying to fill a bunch of spots with warm bodies, okay? We want something for you, not something from you. We're not trying to just get slave labor or something around here to force you to do stuff. No, we want you to find a place where you can truly plug in and where you can connect and where you can use your gifts to serve others. So beyond that, beyond serving here at Icon, because it doesn't just stop here. As the band plays these last couple songs, I just want you to really think, how can I implement this in my life moving forward? The places I find myself this week, the people I come in contact with when I'm at home, when I'm at work, when I'm at school, how can I leverage my power and my authority for the sake of others? How can I help? How can I leverage me for you? Let me pray for you.